Our final speech for this session is by Lauren Chief Elk, a native Assiniboine and Blackfoot woman born in Montana in 1988, who has become a leading voice in stopping violence against Indigenous women. In 2012, she co-founded the Save Wiyabi Project, and Wiyabi means woman, an advocacy group that addresses violence against Native American women and develops community-based solutions for Native women in both tribal and urban areas. Today, we perform her words, "There is no we," V-Day, Indigenous Women, and the myth of shared gender oppression, which she published last year, criticizing Eve Ensler and the 1 Billion Rising campaign, a global initiative to end gender-based violence, for erasing the experiences of Indigenous women. Delivering Lauren Chief Elk's words today is Amina Patton. As a designer and writer, Ms. Patton sees her work as a form of service. She uses her creative activity as a means of having social impact. She has explored public health and education, as well as how music can build communities. Her inspiration comes from her roots back home in Atlanta, specifically her mother, who once told her, "There's no harm in asking." Ladies and gentlemen, Amina Patton as Lauren Chief Elk.
Give me a second. All right. On February 14, 2013, Eve Ensler and her organization V-Day hosted an event called 1 Billion Rising. It was slated as a global movement to end violence against women, with countries around the world participating in dance events to bring attention to what Ensler describes as shared gender oppression among women. The idea is that all women of all backgrounds around the world are subjected to sexualized violence, so we can all come together with common needs. Last year on the 14th, Ensler decided that 1 Billion Rising Canada was going to spotlight Indigenous women. What she failed to recognize and acknowledge in her spotlighting efforts was that February 14th is already an important day on the calendar for Indigenous women across the country, and has been so for decades. This year will mark the 23rd annual Women's Memorial March, which originated in downtown Eastside in Vancouver and has since spread across the country. These events are specific and important because they were created in the context of structural and societal indifference towards Indigenous women and in response to the widespread problem of their disappearances and murders. The actions made by V-Day on February 14, 2013 bulldozed and railroaded existing grassroots organizing by Indigenous women, and then attempted to silence Indigenous women for dissenting. These actions are unfortunately emblematic of mainstream feminism and its anti-violence movement. White feminism does not provide a frame of reference to address issues that affect Indigenous people or other women of color that is not based in white supremacy. The standards of justice, equality, and even definitions of gender violence are white. One of the most glaring examples of this disconnect was the tribal provisions in the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. For a decade, Indigenous women had worked on a restoration of sovereignty to present to the federal government as a specific redress to violence. While organizing to get the Violence Against Women Act reauthorized with full tribal provisions, I run into significant pushback from white feminist groups who were ready to cut that portion of the law and let it sink because tribal authority had become a point of contention with our elected officials. This year, a new piece of legislation is on the table called the International Violence Against Women Act. The idea behind this legislation is that the United States and white feminism need to rescue women and girls around the world from their abusers by instilling Western values and approaches to solving violence into other countries. Amnesty International says the International Violence Against Women Act would permanently integrate gender-based violence prevention and response into all U.S. government programming overseas operations. This means U.S. military members and contractors who are violent against women globally would be enforcing this. The problem with the framing of sexualized violence as an issue that hurts all women equally is that it erases many of the historical and current experiences for Indigenous women. Rape in particular is a force of colonization. It is a tool used to acquire land and keep the United States empire going. While Indigenous communities are doing work to address internalized symptoms of colonization, such as interpersonal violence, this interpersonal violence is not something traditional to many Indigenous nations. We have fundamental and ideological differences about interpersonal violence, justice, organizing, and solutions. We are working on restoring our bonds with our men, two-spirit people, and reclaiming our sense of being Indigenous, and reclaiming our sense of being a people. In contrast, the harsher crackdown on interpersonal violence facilitated by mainstream feminism is designed to break up Indigenous communities, because that is the inherent goal of the state. The idea of women unifying and sharing gender experiences only works under the assumption that women of color are going to submit and be nice to their oppressor. And it is an assumption mainstream feminism has no issue with. But this is not going to happen, because we are going to continue to dismantle systemic forces of oppression and ongoing colonization. Thank you.
Yes.